Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 292 and we're covering Presbyterorum Ordinis 20 to 21, and we need to pay priests reasonably. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about how priests need to continue to study in various areas, most of all the sacred sciences like theology. Today we're going to conclude chapter 3 and conclude section 3 obviously then. Chapter 3 is on the life of priests and section 3 is on aids to the life of priests. And the summary today is we need to pay priests equitably and provide for their retirement. Paragraph 20 is about paying priests, 21 is about funds for priest retirement. So let's get straight into 20. It has two subparagraphs. A, which is on there, should be set equitably paid for priests, and B, reform to eliminate benefits and certain kind of historical means of remunerating priests. So let's read it. A, providing equitable remuneration for priests as those dedicated to the service of God and the fulfillment of the office entrusted to them. Priests deserve to receive an equitable remuneration because the laborer is worth his hire, Luke 10. And the Lord directed those who preach the gospel should have their living from the gospel, 1 Corinthians 9. Wherefore, insofar as an equitable remuneration of priests would not be provided otherwise, the faithful themselves, that is, those in whose behalf the priest labors, are truly obliged to see to it that they can provide what help is necessary for the truly honorable and worthy life of priests. The bishops, however, should admonish the faithful concerning this obligation of theirs. And they should see to it, whether each individual of his own diocese, or more aptly, several together common territory, that norms be established according to which suitable support is rightly provided for those who do fulfill or have fulfilled a special office in the service of the people of God. The remuneration received by each one, in accord with his office and the conditions of time and place, should be fundamentally the same for all the circumstances and befitting his station. Moreover, those who have dedicated themselves to the service of the priesthood by reason of the remuneration they receive should not only be able to honorably provide for themselves, but also themselves be provided by some means of helping the needy. For the ministry of the poor has always been held in great honor in the church from the beginnings. Furthermore, this remuneration should be such that it will permit priests each year to take a suitable and sufficient vacation, something which indeed the bishop should see to their priests be able to have. So this number is not super complicated, but it's making sure that priests are paid equitably. And it's good to have a kind of set norm in the area, like either the diocese or the ecclesiastical province, which is the archdiocese and all the dioceses around it, or even a larger area, to set and have a set rate that priests in this area are going to, receive this much money or things like that, independent of whether they're a high school chaplain, a pastor, associate pastor, things like that. Maybe small advances for certain roles that are more stressful or something, but not a huge thing where people are seeking to be pastors just to get just because they're paid 3 times as much or something, and such like that. I know, for example, my role where I'm teaching at Holy Apostles, most of my paycheck is set by the fact that I'm a priest who's 10 to 14 years ordained in the Diocese of Norwich. They have a set rate for that, and that's the majority of mine. I make a little bit more than that on certain things. It's actually kind of variable based on exactly what I do for the year, but that's the idea. And it avoids this idea of priests seeking roles for money, because we shouldn't be seeking, I want to be the pastor, I want to be this for money. No. Hopefully, most diocesan priests want to be pastors. That's why you become a diocesan priest generally. And it's a good idea. And being a pastor is a good thing to desire. But you should desire it for helping God's people, not for the money. And then, obviously, the faithful needs to support priests. The bishop should encourage them in this. And we need to make sure this happens, because we have priests who've dedicated years to study and dedicate their lives to helping you out. And that means that you as the parishioners need to make sure that they can live without starving or without things like that. It's not to say that they're going to live richly. No, they aren't. They shouldn't. And this money should also allow priests out of their own to give some money to charity. It's great for priests to be able to tithe with 10% or even something like that to charities they support. And finally, it also mentions that there is that moderate vacation. This is not to say, hey, we're going to go on this world tour or anything like that. But it's great when I see priests who are going on vacation. I know, for example, A few years ago, I was at a parish, and half a dozen priests who were in the seminary together had rented out a cabin for a week, not far from the parish, and they came in to celebrate the Sunday Mass. And that's a great example there to say, hey, they're just renting a cabin for a week. They're not, and it's within a few hour drive of where all of them are ministering as priests. They are ministering in different dioceses, but they're all within, a few hour drive of where we were. And that can be a great thing. So that really builds a priest fraternity, and it really shows that there is that need in our ministry as priests to have some kind of relaxation, some kind of time off. So paragraph B here is about eliminating certain benefits as priest remuneration. This is a change from historical ways and kind of saying these ways don't really fit with the modern world that well. So I'm going to read it, then explain a little bit of what this was historically, because it's not, if you don't know the history, this paragraph might not be super clear. B, special importance ought to be given to the office fulfilled by sacred ministers. Therefore, the so-called system of benefits should be relinquished, or at least reformed, that the place of the benefits, or the right to revenue from the endowments attached to an office, would be held as a secondary, and that the first place in law would be given to the ecclesiastical office itself. From this, it should be understood that whatever office is conferred in a stable manner is to be exercised for a spiritual purpose. So historically, what would happen is that a certain office, like a pastor of a certain parish in a certain town, or the bishop, would also have a kind of secular title to a certain amount of land that would be farmed, and then they'd get the profit from that farming or things like that, or some other kind of investment. And that was a way to pay priests, which worked historically. Today, the problem is that these have varied so much in value that you'd have priests really some priests starving and other priests living a life of luxury due to these. And so the idea is that we take these and we use them more commonly to fund priests so that we have a more equitable more equitable salary is what it's getting at. And this should not be a primary form of remuneration. Some of this can still be in the background as a small portion or something like that, but rolling this into salaries, rolling this into a set equal payment to all priests in the diocese is really what the Vatican Council is encouraging here, as opposed to this historical method. And this is a matter of prudence, a matter of circumstance, where honestly, 500 years ago, this probably was a good system based on how economics and banking and everything worked then, but it's not the best system in the 20th or 21st century. So moving on to paragraph 21, it again has two subparagraphs. A is about setting up funds to provide for priest retirements, and B is about Episcopal conferences able to set these funds up, and wealthier priests should consider donating their own money. So let's read it. A, on setting up common funds and establishing a system of social assistance for priests, we should always keep before our eyes the example of the faithful of the early church in Jerusalem, who held all things in common, and distribution was made to each according to each one's need. Acts 4. So it is supremely fitting, at least in regions where a supportive clergy completely or largely depends on the offerings of the faithful, that their offerings for this purpose be collected by a particular diocesan institution, with which the bishop administers with the help of priests, and when useful, of laymen who are expert in financial matters. Further, it is hoped that insofar as it is possible in individual dioceses or regions, there be established a common fund enabling bishops to satisfy obligations to other deserving persons and meet the needs of various dioceses. This would also enable wealthier dioceses to help the poor, that the need of the latter might be supplemented by the abundance of the former. These common funds, even though they should be principally made up of the offering of the faithful, also should be provided for by the other duly established sources. So this is really making sure that these funding, when people are donating to the church, some of that goes towards the priest's retirement. Now, most diocesan priests in the U.S. are generally responsible for their own retirement, but this can be a backup plan, and this can be a kind of base salary so that they aren't starving, they aren't out on the street, and things like that. One of the things noted here is where it depends on the donations of the faithful. And the thing is that our system in most of the U.S., where we all donate money to our local parish, and that local parish gives money to the diocese and things like that, is not the only system in the world. There are other systems. For example, the Diocese of Wheeling, West Virginia, was given a whole bunch of oil fields in Texas like 100 years ago. So actually in Wheeling, the diocese gives money to the parishes, not vice versa. And in places like Italy, what happens in Italy is, 0.8%, 8 out of 1,000, of your paycheck goes to charities. and you can assign which charity you want on your tax forms. And if you don't assign it, the same amount goes out. It's just distributed according to how people in your region want it distributed. And through this, the Italian Catholic Church gets a large portion of its donations for the year. And so a lot goes from the bishops' conferences to the diocese to the parishes in Italy, for example. And so things like that, it's already more set up some kind of retirement, whereas a system like the U.S. where the money's going up is a little more challenging, a little more necessary to make sure that priests have this support. And so this is the idea here. We have diocese or region able to set up a plan to cover that retirement. On a practical level, the places that you're often likely to see this is that most annual bishop's appeal or annual diocesan appeals include this as one of the items, one of the larger items, usually like 10, 20, 30%, depending on the diocese. And so it's a significant portion of the annual bishop's appeal, annual diocesan appeal. And the other way is the USCCB has a fund for retiring religious, and there is a Sunday that they encourage parishes to have a second collection for that. Not every parish would, but many of you may have heard of it then. And these are the types of things that we're talking about here. These funds that then the interest of which is used to help fund retirements for priests and nuns and things like that. And ultimately here we look at the idea of the richer ones helping the poor ones, because obviously some dioceses are richer than others. We just talked about Wheeling, West Virginia. You'd think of that as one of the poorer dioceses in the U.S., but for whatever reason, they got this huge donation back in the day, and it is one of the more well-off dioceses in the U.S., even though the people are not the most well-off. There are some other dioceses which are very well-off due to them being in very rich areas. You look at a diocese like Bridgeport, Connecticut, and that has one of the highest, I don't know if it's the highest, but it has one of the highest per capita wealth and incomes in the country among the Catholics there. And so you're going to have a lot more than, say, in Mobile, Alabama, where you have much more struggle. So let's go on to paragraph B, 21B. 21B has two sentences. The first one is Episcopal conferences can set up such funds, and the second one is wealthier priests should consider donating their own money. So let's read them. B. Moreover, in nations where Social Security for the clergy is not yet aptly established, let the Episcopal Conference see to it that in accord with ecclesiastical and civil laws, there may be either diocesan institutes, whether federated with one another or established in various dioceses together, or territorial associations, which under the vigilance of the hierarchy should be made sufficient and suitable provision for the program of preventative medicine and necessary support of priests who suffer from sickness, invalid conditions, or old age. Let priests share in this established institute properly by a spirit of solidarity with their brothers to take part in their tribulations while at the same time being freed from an anxious concern for their own future so that they can cultivate evangelical poverty more readily and give themselves fully to the salvation of souls. Let those in charge of this act to bring together the institutions of various nations in order that their strength may be more firmly achieved and more broadly based. As I noted, this has two distinct sentences. The first one is about these Episcopal conferences setting up funds or making sure dioceses set up funds. And one of the things here to note is it also has to concern when you have priests who get sick, because you'll have priests who will get cancer in their 40s, or priests who are in a car accident, and are unable to do public ministry anymore in their 40s or 50s. And most diocesan priests, I think, who are prudent and things like that, they're setting up a retirement for when they turn 70 and they retire or something like that. They're usually not too bad, but the priests who have very serious health concerns or accidents in their 40s, 50s, even 30s sometimes, will be the ones who will struggle the most. And those are the ones we have to care for and be cautious about the most in that regard. And then finally, we need priests who are wealthier areas, wealthier kind of families, whatever, to help donate, to help the other ones. And that's important. So hopefully this helps. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarCrest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. Tomorrow we're going to conclude Presbyterium Ordinis with the next paragraph 22 on Jesus is always with the priest. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. For more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, we've also set up an email for questions and comments at Vatican2@sqpn.com, and my own website, frmatthewlc.com, has a contact form.
Amen.